ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 3 of the series What If Quirkless Izuku Had the Abilities of the Overwatch Agents. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Alright Izuku, we need to go for a ride, Cassidy voices as he pushes the front door open. Izuku jumps up in surprise, and he spins onto his knees to look towards the door, peering from behind the couch. He looked to Cassidy in surprise. He wasn't expecting Cassidy to come barging through the front door, nor what the ride would be for. Why? Izuku slowly asked. Cassidy went out to get some food and drinks since they were hungry. Izuku had just been watching television since the morning as Cassidy had decided to help him stay in hiding. Welp security footage caught you disappearing into an alley with only a hover truck coming out. So, they've deduced that you were in the truck, and now they have located the truck. So, a bunch of heroes and police are roaming the area. Cassidy replied coolly, and even with a smile. Izuku's eyes shot wide like headlights, and his mouth dropped open as his shock slowly morphed into fear. Well, what? Wait, where are we going? What about the apartment? Izuku choked out. This is just a rental. This entire town block is owned by one guy who allows cheap rent for the less fortunate. As long as you can prove you need some financial help, he'll allow you refuge here. Japan actually has a lot of these places since the Omnic crisis. And about our next stop? Not sure. I'm looking for a certain individual. I have an idea about where they are, but it'll still be a challenge. Heard they're quite elusive, Cassidy laughed lightly. Cassidy walked over to the fridge and grabbed a few of the remaining items inside and tossed them into a bag. He slung it over his shoulder before walking towards Izuku. He ruffled his hair before walking towards an outlet and shutting it off. The television quickly fizzles out. Help me turn everything off. That's one of the things the landlord tells the tenants to do if they ever want to leave, Cassidy told Izuku. Izuku was still making sense of the situation. He wonders who this mystery person is that Cassidy wants to find. He would guess the girl that could turn into physical purple binary code. But didn't they already meet? They seemed more like a trickster, and Izuku was willing to bet that Cassidy wouldn't be able to find her even if he wanted to, so it probably wasn't her. Izuku went around the small apartment with Cassidy, turning off all of the outlets and taking all of their things. Izuku grabbed his phone and sighed as he checked the battery. It still hadn't charged. The screen had cracked from his resting on nuts and nails in the back of the hover truck, but all the jostling must have broken the charging point. Now Izuku has lost all of his research. He doesn't have his analysis books, invention designs, or any of his analogs he did on his computer or phone. He felt disheartened and lost. All of that work and passion had all been quenched and destroyed. His parents, Izumi, Shoto, Momo, and Katsuki had destroyed or forced him to lose things he had worked so hard for, but he had never lost so much so quickly. It had been less than 2 days, and all he had left now was his inventions he kept in his yellow bag. But for how much younger? The two moved quickly and finished the task within a minute. Cassidy hurried over towards his hoverbike that he parked in the small shack right next to his house. Izuku followed Cassidy and jerked back as something flew over at him. He caught it in his hands and looked down to see it was the helmet he had on while riding with Cassidy. Hop on, Izuku. We'll still go and get food, but you'll need to keep that helmet on. Your face is everywhere, and your frizzy green hair is pretty identifiable, Cassidy informed Izuku. He nodded his head before squeezing the helmet on. It wasn't difficult. The helmet was made for someone much older, and Izuku is barely even a teenager, a small one for his age at that. Cassidy mounted the hover bike, and Izuku got on behind him. He looked ahead and saw that the doors were still closed. Whoops, I'll go dash, Izuku started saying before the revving of the motorcycle echoed in the small room they sat in. Wait, Izuku spat out quickly, but Cassidy wasn't listening. With his helmet on, he was ready to ride, and he turned the brakes off to get the bike moving. Izuku yelled in panic and latched onto Cassidy's back as the duo smashed through the flimsy doors. Ha ha ha, hang on kiddo, Cassidy laughs to himself as he starts driving down the road. Izuku grips onto the back of his shirt with shaky hands. He has the front of his helmet pressed against his back as he nervously quakes with his eyes closed shut. But slowly Izuku finds the courage to move his head away and look around. Everything was moving by so fast, but not fast enough that he could make out the prefecture he was in. He was still in Defanamu, the old home of the Hanamura Empire, the world's largest known criminal organization to date. They managed trading from lucrative weapons, armory, and illegal substances, but they were shut down from more of their own doing than anything the heroes had done. Izuku believed it had something to do with the eldest heir of the Shimada clan, but it had been years since Izuku had looked at Hanamura. Izuku watched the cars, zooming cars, and now was feeling a little motion sickness. It had been years since he had been in a car at all, since his parents never take him anywhere. Ever since they were older enough to go to middle school, all car trips stopped since he and Izumi could walk. They used to walk together, but Izuku soon started going earlier, so he could get to school later to avoid his sister blasting him into trash cans as they walked. The day he made that decision was when shot him in front of a car. If it didn't stop in time, he would have died. Izuku ducked his head back in for the rest of the ride to avoid the need to puke. He'd hate to do it into his helmet, and the awkward conversation he'd have with Cassidy to explain it is something Izuku wants to avoid entirely. Slowly the hoverbike's pace drops significantly, allowing Izuku time to breathe and properly look around. They were at a service station, and Cassidy parks his bike next to the pumps. "Stay here, people will still be looking for you. Do you want a slushie or something?" Cassidy offers Izuku. Izuku's eyes light up with delight. Eagerness filled him, yet Cassidy couldn't see through the helmet. Izuku could practically feel his mouth water from the longing to taste something delicious and sweet, and he excitedly bobbed his head up and down. "Yes, please. Could I get a raspberry or Fanta?" Izuku enthusiastically asked, his words running out far too quickly for his own mouth to keep up. Cassidy laughed and gently patted Izuku's head that was still encased in the helmet. "Yep, I'll be back in a sec," Cassidy told Izuku. He grabbed the pump hose and jammed it into the bike and watched the price and fuel numbers rise steadily, but at a fast pace. Not so long after, when the cost was just under $30, Cassidy put the pump back. He then turned and walked inside, leaving Izuku along outside to wait. To pass the time, Izuku looked around. Defanamu was definitely a lot different than Musafatsu. The prefect was significantly poorer than his home neighborhood, and that was his parents purposefully picking a less expensive area to live. Trash cans were overfilled, graffiti covered the walls on all the buildings, and the asphalt roads were a light gray instead of shining black. The place also looked relatively deserted. There wasn't even a car driving by. There were quite few cars the last time Izuku looked up. Maybe there had gone a back way. Bang, 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 bang. "Ga!" Izuku yelled. The loud noise shook Izuku deeply and frightened him badly enough to make him fall off the bike. Izuku got onto his knees and peeked his eyes over the top of the bike towards the service station. Those were gunshots, and they definitely came from inside the service station that Cassidy was inside of currently. What scared Izuku more was that they didn't sound like shots Cassidy's revolver made. Izuku felt his body grow cold as his hair stood on end. Had Cassidy just been killed, he couldn't have. His quirk, observation, would have allowed him to see the situation before it would happen. Something else was going on inside. Izuku knew it. He also knew that he should wait by the hover CYCL. Hell, he should probably run away from here and hide. Call the police. Ask for heroes. Do anything but move towards the loud gun sounds. But Izuku was cursed with a horrible combination of traits: morbid curiosity and an extreme flight fear response. Those two aspects counterattack each other hard, and it's usually the former that wins out in the end. Because Izuku is emotional, even though he has a strong sense of reason, his emotions essentially quenched his rational thinking. His face was all over the news, and the last thing he wanted was the heroes to take him back home for his sister, and now potentially his parents to beat him. Plus, he didn't want to hide because that would mean he could lose Cassidy, and Izuku was far too desperate to no longer have the single person to be nice to him since he diagnosed Quirkless. So, against his better judgment, Izuku crept towards the service station with the helmet still on. He still wanted to keep his identity secret. Who knows? Whoever had the gun may want to take him in as a bounty. With heavy caution, Izuku put himself up against the service station wall. He peered up to window and peeked inside. Izuku felt his body stiffen in fear and shock. Izuku had a clear shot towards the clerk's desk at the back of the store, and the aisles in the store had been knocked over and shoved to each opposing wall, leaving a large open path in the middle. Mayhem had happened in here, and Izuku hadn't even heard it, meaning it was done before Cassidy had walked in. Izuku frowned. So Cassidy saw this and continued inside anyway? Wait, where was he now? Hey, I'm complying. I'm complying, Izuku heard Cassidy say in English. He looked around again, but still couldn't see him. He then heard heavy stomps, and Izuku was able to determine them coming from the staff room behind the counter. The door slowly opens, and Izuku is shocked to see a large Omnic carrying Cassidy by the back of his shirt. The Omnic's stature and equipment suggest that he isn't among the trash heap that mostly populates the Omnics in Japan. His design and metal also don't match the ones Izuku has seen himself and online. Their bowler hat, plated metal over their arms and green eye sensors. Izuku would say that they were an American design. Even his jacket was metal, replicating a brown leather biker top with fake metal fluff around his neck. His jacket was open like a gangster, but wore fancy dress breathes with knee pads. His face also had a large and thick black mustache that reminded Izuku of a butler or cowboy, certainly Western. But what was an American Omnic doing in Japan? Even if someone bought him, they would have been a part of a villainous organization and immediately change his design. Shut it, McCree. I want answers in my bike. A growling female's voice snapped with venom as she came into view just behind the hulking Omnic. Bob. The woman shouted, and the Omnic instantly acted, slamming Cassidy against the wall, creating a hole behind him. Ouch. Mind being careful there, Bob. Cassidy grunted but smiled up at the Omnic, who only silently stared down at Cassidy. Izuku looked to Cassidy's gun holster and saw no gun. He was unarmed, and some intimidating lady in Omnic had him under their thumb. Were they after McCree for his bounty? They know him as his fake name. Wait, I think I've seen her before, Izuku muttered to himself as he got a better look at the woman. She was slender, and her features were sharp. Izuku could only get the side profile of her face, but could tell her scowl was pointed and deep. She wore a black vest with a puffy white, long-sleeved undershirt with a red tie. She wore denim breathes and had long leather boots with a large wedge. She had a bunch of added accessories such as straps and buttons. It was hard for Izuku to tell what part of her clothing was and what she added on. But her most defining features that Izuku could clearly see were her BLD red lipstick and long white hairs that had the top concealed by a black long-brimmed cowboy hat. She was definitely Western like Cassidy, and her snow hair and attire perfectly matched a renowned criminal in the American borders. The notorious gangster, Calamity Ash, and right now, she had a rifle locked onto Cassidy, a mere meter away. Geez, Ash, you can call me Cassidy, you know, Cassidy said, turning his head to face Ash. Can I? I thought that man had died. Ash rebutted in a breathy tone, and Izuku could feel the accusation through it. Clearly this was more than someone after Cassidy for a bounty. She wanted more than that. Probably explains why she was Japan instead of America. No, Cassidy replied. His voice was strong, but his demeanor reflected the opposite as his shoulders slumped and his head dipped down. They gave me that name to save face. Hiring a youngster with a record for bank heist wouldn't have looked good, Cassidy explained. Izuku contemplated what he should do. He couldn't run away to get help. Heroes would also take Cassidy down since he was still a wanted man, and without Cassidy, Izuku would be alone. It wouldn't take long for the authorities to find him and take him back home. Izuku shivered at that thought before feeling shameful in himself. Was he really worried about himself when Cassidy's life was in the hands of criminals at this moment? Shut it. Where's my bike? Ash shouted, suddenly becoming enraged. She stomped her foot on the ground like a toddler and jutted her gun into Cassidy's chest. Cassidy didn't seem bothered and nodded his head in direction of the window. It's just outside, Ash. Cassidy spoke before he looked towards the window. His face paused, and worry quickly flashed through his eyes as he spotted Izuku's helmet peering at them from outside. Izuku quickly ducked as he saw Ash start to turn. A few seconds passed, and Izuku felt his hand push against his heart as it pounded against his chest to the point of being painful. But it was a feeling Izuku was used to. The many times he believed Izumi, Katsuki, Shoto, or Momo was going to kill him have been staggering. You know. I thought you'd have sold it when coming up here in Japan, Ash said. Why would I do that? I needed a ride. and I knew I could get away with quite a few things as several parts of Japan are entirely neglected by the government. Cassidy responded, and in the back of Izuku's mind, he noted the cruel reality of that statement. Musafatsu was a large city within Tokyo, but the amount of unsupervised area for villains to roam free was terrifying and goes to show how little a hero is willing to do when there are no cameras around. If there is no news station nearby, there will also be no heroes. Izuku's heartbeat had slowed down, and Izuku risked the chance to peer his head back up as he believed Ash had probably turned back. Cassidy. Once again, Izuku peeked back into the window and could now see Ash twirling her gun around while looking at an indifferent Cassidy, his eyes subtly moving back to look at Izuku in the window. So why are you in Japan anyway? You wouldn't come to a foreign country with no idea to speak a language if there wasn't some kind of prize. Ash spoke with an air of dangerous superiority. She approached Cassidy and pushed her gun to his chin, forcefully pushing his head back. Cassidy gritted his teeth as the gun's barrel is threateningly shoved against him. Izuku held his breath in panic as he watched. Izuku didn't fully understand Ash's question as he was missing some of the English vocabulary used, but what he gathered was that she wanted something from Cassidy. He wanted to do something, but what would he be able to do to help Cassidy? If he were to intervene in any way, he'd probably just make the situation worse. But he had to do something, but what? Izuku looked around, his eyes moving around the outside of the service station. Unless he was going to drive the hover bike into the building, nothing out here would help him. First of all, I can speak Japanese decently well, and my business here wouldn't interest you at all, Cassidy slowly said. His voice was oddly strong despite his dire situation. He was clearly being careful with his words, but Izuku was astounded by the lack of worry his face had. Maybe he was good at pretending? Izuku wouldn't be surprised to hear from Cassidy that this was a familiar situation for him, and he'd always managed to wriggle his way out. But Izuku didn't want to rely solely on Cassidy's charisma. Calamity Ash was hot-tempered and clearly had it out for Cassidy. If Izuku let this continue, BLD may cover the walls. So Izuku looked around inside, hoping for something, but he had no clue on what he would even be looking for. He couldn't sneak in as the automatic sliding doors would beep and immediately signal his arrival. Perhaps he was looking for a second way inside? Izuku moved across the window as the only thing of interest left in the room was the open staff door. Izuku moved over far enough so he could stare down the contents of the door. It didn't reveal much as the room was larger than a corridor, so nothing of use could be seen in there. However, he could see a metal door laying on the floor, revealing another entrance or exit depending on how you looked at it. That was his entry card, and quickly Izuku dashed around the side of the building, looking for his way in. I don't buy it, McCree, Ash snarled, pushing her gun harder into Cassidy's chin. Cassidy grunted at his head being forced to move more against the wall behind him, now slightly glaring at Ash. He seemed to be more annoyed at being called McCree than the gun clogging his throat. I'm here from a favor. Genji, an old partner of mine. Cybernetic ninja, you might have seen him. He wants me to talk with his brother. That's it, Cassidy explained, but Ash's steel gaze only narrowed like a snake and her fingers coiled around her rifle's trigger. That's all. I call bullshit, Ash snapped, making Cassidy sigh. How about you, Ash? I know you wouldn't follow me all the way to Japan just to get your bike back, Cassidy asked, changing the topic as he knew he'd get nowhere with Ash questioning him. He was telling the truth, but she didn't believe him. If this were to continue, it would be as good as talking to a brick wall. I think I'm the one asking questions here, Bob, Ash says, suddenly shouted, and swiftly Bob pulled Cassidy away from the wall before slamming him back into the Cassidy-sized hole. Cassidy groaned in both pain and frustration, reaching both hands to rub his saw back. Izuku turned into the open door at the back of the building, clutching his yellow bag on his back. He turned into the room and immediately froze at the unconscious woman on the floor with her hands tied behind her back and cloth over her mouth. Undoubtedly the work was done by Ash. Izuku stepped over her, sympathetically cringing as he did. He reached the other end of the room with the open door and tried to peer around it, but his large helmet made it difficult. Izuku pouted and thought for a moment. He didn't want to take the helmet off as it would expose his identity and Ash would set course on him. There was a high likelihood that she didn't speak Japanese, but he thought the same of Cassidy and was proven wrong on that. But this helmet was now just acting as a nuisance, and realistically, The only way for Izuku to help Cassidy would be to use his CRB glasses and Jolt tokens, and his former ability would be useless while he wore this helmet. So Izuku slowly clamped his fingers around his helmet strap clip and slid it off of his head. He carefully placed it on the ground, not wanting to alert Ash of his presence. Izuku moved his yellow bag in front of him and bit by bit, unzipped his bag. Once his bag was opened, Izuku reached for his metal water bottle and inconspicuously black marble sack, taking them out with care. "I'm losing my patience, McCree. Why are you here, damn it? Who are you after?" Ash yelled, and Izuku jolted in fear from her high screeching voice. "God, I already told you who I'm looking for, Ash. What more do you want?" Cassidy shouted out in frustration. Izuku put his CBR glasses on that he had just taken out from his water bottle and clutched a Jolt token in his hand. He peered around the door and looked to the side to see Cassidy and Ash in a fierce stare down. Bob, the Omnic Izuku assumed, looked indifferent in the situation, looking back and forth between Cassidy and Izuku. He wondered if the robot could speak or if his model didn't have a voice modulator. "I'm not taking that bullshit, McCree," Ash yelled, smacking Cassidy's chest with the top of her gun. Cassidy groaned in discomfort and glared at Ash. "I need to get rid of her gun," Izuku thought to himself, but it wasn't a simple task. Bob would notice if Izuku started sneaking closer to them, and putting himself out in the open would put him at risk to being shot, even with his CRB glasses. He could throw a Jolt token at her, but it wouldn't guarantee that she'd drop the gun. Unless Izuku hit her wrist, but she was quite the distance away, and he doubted he would be nearly accurate enough to get her arm. There was also the problem of her quirk. He didn't know what it was. He only knew who Calamity Ash was from his intensive research on Overwatch, and she happened to pop up one time. If his memory was correct, it was an intelligence-based quirk which was quite vague. For a quirk to be classified that, intelligence would have to be the main aspect of enhancement in contrast to any other abilities, so she could have a numbed body to remove pain to correlate to enhanced intelligence, and if so, Jolt token wouldn't work at all. "You're still lying through your teeth? How would you even talk to Genji's brother if he's Japanese?" Ash asked with rising agitation. Her foot was tapping the ground rapidly and flailing her gun to the ground, to Cassidy, to the roof, and back at Cassidy. "I told you can speak Japanese decently well," Cassidy replied with a coy smile, answering Ash's question in Japanese. The intimidating woman now looked dumbfounded, and her mouth dropped open. "Genji, why did she pronounce his name so poorly? Oh wait, I remember that name. He was in Blackwatch with Gabrielle and Cassidy. Oh my god, how did I not realize that before?" Well, there wasn't much information about him, and he seemed to disappear. Once, Overwatch was wait. "Okay, calm down, Izuku," Izuku told himself, slapping his cheeks to pause his scattered brain. If Ash is acting like a toddler and badly mispronouncing Genji even after Cassidy pronounced it, so her intelligence has an activation requirement, likely ingesting something or maybe even being hit in the head. Either way, that reduces the chance of additional aspects of her quirk, but doesn't completely remove them, so Izuku will have to be wary. But his top priority is her weapon. If he can disarm her, he removes her most dangerous aspect and can turn it on her, which he'll probably need to do since Bob is a wild card. However, Izuku doubts he'll be able to even pull the trigger. He doesn't have the guts to do that. But how will he retrieve the gun? Even if he can make Ash drop it, she'll pick it back up before he can even get there. So Izuku turns and looks around the staff room. It was generally empty. There were a bunch of empty shelves which Izuku hadn't personally expected but made sense. The most eye-catching thing in her was the unconscious woman's purse. But Izuku didn't stop looking. The room was destroyed, probably from Bob, and many things were broken on the ground. He found a rope and noticed a broken-off part of the shelf was shaped closely to a hook. It was thicker than a hook, but still thinner than his finger, so if Izuku wanted to use it as a hook, he could. Izuku wrapped the rope around the broken shelf part, but still was stuck on how he was supposed to make Ash drop her gun. Maybe he could throw something with the Jolt token? A hard impact combined with a jolt may cause her to accidentally drop her gun. Something heavy, perhaps? Izuku grabbed a dislodged stone that was under the shelf. It seemed to have been uprooted by the ground, badly misshapen, but no sharp edges. He grabs the stone that barely fit into his hand with the Jolt token and pressed it down, preparing its activation. He peeks around the wall again and sees Ash still facing Cassidy with her hand on her hip and her gun resting next to her heel. Cassidy is looking back at her, but notices Izuku as he moves from out behind the wall with his arm raised back, ready to peg the stone at her. Bob noticed Izuku as well, and his robot arm snapped towards Izuku. But Ash didn't have time to turn around before the stone and jolt token hit her back. Gah! Ash yelled, her fingers slipping off of her gun as she stumbled forward from the shock. Izuku acted quickly and threw the hook at her gun before quickly yanking it towards him. It didn't make the full distance as the hook flew back to Izuku and hit his shin. With the rifle tumbling back onto the floor, he dashed towards it. Bob sprang into action, releasing Cassidy and pointing his right mechanical arm at Izuku. Izuku grabbed the weapon and looked up to see Bob looking at him with his right arm out and his index finger pointed at him. He withdrew his extended finger, and immediately, 6 gun barrels shot out from his arm. 2 on the top, 2 on the lower right side, and another 2 on the lower left, making the shape of a triangle. Izuku squeaked in immense fear. He pressed the button on side of his glasses, and a blue barrier appeared in front of him. Izuku dived to the side and Bob fires a bullet, hitting the CRB, dispersing but immediately breaking the barrier. Izuku creates another barrier while trying to hide under the fallen aisle shelves. Bob, stop, they're a kid. Cassidy shouts, reaching up and grabbing Bob's arm, forcefully pulling his arm away. What's a kid doing in here? Ash yelled, turning towards where Izuku was and rubbing her back. She made eye contact with the kid as he stared at her with fierce determination that she was shocked and intrigued. Her eyes, however, widened when he lifted her gun and aimed it at her. Stop threatening Cassidy, Izuku said in serious tone, however his voice wavered with nerves. Ash's eyebrows raised higher at him, speaking English before scowling. She turned on her heel and glared daggers at Cassidy. You brought a boy with you? Cole, what the F are you doing? Ash growled, and Cassidy shook his head. I agree that he shouldn't be in here, but you should do what he says, Cassidy states, pulling his hand out from behind Bob with his peacekeeper in hand. Ash looked stunned, and for a second, Cassidy was worried that she'd pop a BLD vessel. She sighed and lifted her arms in the signaling surrender. Bob sees Ash do this and quickly copies her action, his arms snapping straight up. Midoriya, what are you doing? That was reckless, Cassidy scolds, turning his attention to Izuku, but thanks to his quirk, he was still very aware of what Bob and Ash were doing. Izuku looks down guiltily because he did agree, but he didn't regret doing this, so his determined eyes focused on Cassidy. I couldn't just leave you. Calling for help from police and heroes would have just made this situation worse. Izuku responded strongly. Why can you both speak English? I ain't fan of being left in the dark, Ash barked, looking between Izuku and Cassidy, but mainly focusing on the cowboy. I just told him coming in here to help me was stupid, Cassidy sighed, talking in English to satisfy the angry gangster. Is he the reason you came to Japan? Ash asked suddenly, confusing Izuku and making Cassidy groan. For the last time, I am only here for a favor. I'm not doing any mercenary or potential money-grabbing business. So, if you came here in hopes for that, then you're sorely disappointed, Cassidy rebuts, and Izuku just has to bob his head with Cassidy as he tries to decipher what he said. He understood most of it, but again, key phases and complicated words confuse his low English vocabulary. So why is he with you? I know you're not the maternal type, Ash accuses with a pointed glare. Other than maternal, Izuku knew what she was asking, and Cassidy was looking at him, waiting for Izuku to say what he should do. She clearly didn't recognize him, most likely from her not reading the news rather than her inability to read it, so Cassidy was wondering how much Izuku wanted to reveal. Izuku pointed to himself, signaling to Cassidy that he wanted to say it, and Cassidy nodded. Izuku cleared his throat, garnering Ash's attention. I'm currently being searched for by Japan's heroes. My parents and siblings have lied to police, saying I'm working with illegal weapon and drug dealers, and Cassidy was kind enough to take pity on me. Izuku carefully responded as he really had to think to use every word before using it. He's like you, Ash, Cassidy inputted, catching Izuku off guard. Ash, who didn't look impressed, spun around to look at Cassidy in surprise. Like me? As in, Ash slowly said, for the first time not sounded angry or sinister since Izuku heard her. Yes, Cassidy cut her off quickly. Izuku was confused. What did Cassidy mean by that? Izuku gave a lot of information, obviously hiding some of the more personal details. Cassidy clearly meant that he and Ash had some similarity in background, But what? Sirens started sounding, and all heads turned towards the windows of the service station. They watched a couple of heroes run into view. Ash had a particularly perplexed look on her face as she saw their eccentric outfits. Made sense. Japanese heroes had far stranger design choices than American heroes. Villains, surrender yourselves. The heroes shouted as they sprinted to the service station's doors. Cassidy moved his gun away from Ash and shot a bullet through the window. He missed, but barely, the bullet whizzing over the heroes' heads. Ah, they have guns. The heroes shouted before running away, looking over their shoulders in wild panic for fear of getting another bullet shot at them. Welp, looks like you're coming with us, Cassidy said, lifting his revolver back and resting the back of it against his shoulder as he gave Ash a smug look. I'm not following you anywhere, Ash spat out angrily, clearly not liking the idea of relying on Cassidy. Oh, Kenneth, I know for a fact you have no plan if you're robbing a service station in a vacant area. Heroes will be after you, and when they catch you, you'll be shipped back to America and locked in a max security prison cell, Cassidy growled at Ash, over her toddler whining at him. Ash grunted and looked down, not facing Cassidy. He sighed and walked up to her. You help us, we help you, Cassidy told her. When he reached her, he put a comforting hand on her shoulder and leaned close to her ear and whispered something to her that Izuku didn't catch. Cassidy then leaned away and started walking towards the staff room, and Izuku hesitantly got onto his feet, still hiding behind his CRB barrier. All right, let's go. We don't want any powerful heroes to be on our case anytime soon, Cassidy ordered. Izuku nodded his head before looking over towards Ash, who was now looking at him. Her eyes weren't as sharp as they looked moments ago. She seemed to be analyzing him and was contemplating with herself. You too, Bob. Come on, Cassidy called before disappearing behind the door. Izuku felt scared as Cassidy hid from view, leaving him with Calamity Ash and her Omnic bodyguard. He held the rifle close to his chest and sped after the American cowboy with the two villains in tow. Izuku stepped over the unconscious woman who was now groaning as she was beginning to wake up. Izuku darted out of the room as the worry of being seen consumed him, although it hardly mattered at the moment. It was irrational, but Izuku couldn't control it. Izuku quickly caught up to Cassidy with Ash and Bob jogging behind. Izuku was still slightly antsy with them being in close proximity. He looked over towards Cassidy, but he hardly seemed to care about. So Izuku reasoned he showed relax a bit as his nerves would only make him make stupid decisions. So what now? Izuku stuttered in English so Ash wouldn't snap at him for speaking Japanese. Cassidy smiled and jammed his metal thumb towards Bob. Bob here is going to give us a ride, aren't you, Bob? Cassidy rhetorically asked with a smile, and Omnic gave a thumbs up. However, Ash took a step forward and crossed her arms over her chest. Not until I get my gun back, Ash stated, looking over towards Izuku and holding her arm out. Izuku spun his body away with the gun clutched against his chest, and his eyes narrowed at Ash. But before he could say anything, Cassidy put his hand on Izuku's shoulder, causing the boy to look up at him. It's all right, Midoriya. She's not going to hurt you, Cassidy said softly. His face held a caring smile, no longer the charming and confident smirk he had before. Izuku hesitated. He trusted Cassidy, but is he seriously ignoring the fact that this woman had her gun against his throat for a few minutes just moments ago? But Ash didn't pull the trigger, even though she looked furious. The two also seemed to have history. They'd have to for Cassidy's statement of, he's just like you, Ash, to make sense. He looked over to the intimidating white-haired gangster and saw her expression was also like Cassidy's. Soft and caring, except hers seemed more force, like she was trying to make herself less scary. Midoriya, Ash started, his name sounding off from her accent. I solemnly swear I will not point my weapon at you. And Cassidy, for now, Ash said, putting her hand over her heart. But her tone changed to annoyed as she brought up Cassidy, and her eyes bore at him. In comparison, Cassidy seemed to gloat at the fact she called him Cassidy and not McCree. Izuku didn't know what solemnly meant, but guessed it was just sincerely promise. Izuku nodded his head and slowly lifted Ash's gun over to her. With a gentle smile, she took it from his hands and thanked her before putting it in a large weapon holster alongst her belt buckle. All right, everyone climbs onto Bob and hold on, Cassidy told the other two as he jumped onto the giant Omnic's shoulder. Ash followed after Cassidy and mounted Bob's other shoulder, leaving Izuku standing unsurely in front of the robotic man. The Omnic held out a hand to Izuku, which scared him at first, but as it stopped motionless in front of him, the greenette jumped onto it, allowing Bob to rise him over his head and in between Cassidy and Ash, startling the teenager. "Where are we going?" Izuku stuttered again as he looked at the ground unsurely. "East. We're heading to the docks as they have plenty of empty warehouses and vacant shacks to hide out and get supplies, and if my sources are correct, the man I'm looking for won't be far," Cassidy stated. "So, the man we're looking for is that Genji's brother? What's the deal?" Ash asked. Bob started to move, walking down another alleyway. "I'll explain when we're not in danger, but when I'm finished, we'll find a way to get out of Japan. For now, you're going to want to hold on Midoriya," Cassidy smirked. Izuku's eyes widened as suddenly Bob started gaining speed. Izuku lowered himself lower and wrapped his arms tighter around the top of Bob's head as his sudden speed was quite intense. Then he screamed as Bob jumped high in the air and cleared several buildings with ease. The four walked along the shipping docks. The night had turned dark as it had taken a while for the group to arrive. It may have been 9 when Cassidy and Izuku reached the service station, but the group had to try and sneak around to Fanamu, since they had to pass populated areas. Izuku forgot to bring his helmet, and people would immediately zone in on his green bushy hair. Bob being a large Omnic would attract unwanted attention, which could lead to both Cassidy and Ash being recognized as well. So, it was of the utmost importance to stay hidden while they maneuvered their way to the shipping docks. Ash led the way into a fishing shack along the dock that connected to a boathouse. She kicked the door, forcing it open despite it being locked, and walked inside. Izuku was still cautious of being around her and was confused on why Cassidy didn't care if she would try and attack him again and why Ash hadn't tried attacking Cassidy again. Cassidy, Izuku, and Bob all followed in after her as she jumped over the counter and kept walking towards the connected boathouse. When inside, Izuku could see 4 different boats. None of them seemed expensive or well-made, older models and clearly used. This wasn't a high-rise part of Defanamu, so things here would be cheaper. "I'm taking the one with a roof," Ash stated as she hopped onto the single boat that had a roof covering the entirety of it. Izuku watched her start opening cabinets and drawers and search for things to make her sleep more comfortable. A loud crash sounded behind Izuku, and he spun around to see Bob sitting down against the wall. He waved apologetically at Izuku before adjusting his bowler hat and covering all but one eye sensor on his head. Izuku felt lost. So many things had happened and changed in the last 48 hours. If somebody told him he'd end up taking refuge in a boathouse with an ex-Overwatch agent and renowned criminal, first he'd be confused on why they were talking to him, then say that they were insane. But this was all happening so fast, and it was a lot for Izuku to take in. He wasn't upset. Somehow, he was happy. He managed to actually help Cassidy today, even though he might not have needed it, and Ash was humanely treating him unlike his own family and classmates. Was it strange that a renowned and highly dangerous villain was treating him better than the #1 hero's daughter? Izuku believed it to be. But despite with Izuku being uncomfortable with the new situation, his curious mind wanted to know more, especially why Cassidy and Ash seemed to be well versed with one another. Izuku looked around trying to find Cassidy and saw him sitting down in a boat with a blanket already over his lower half. Izuku walked over there, and Cassidy looked over, yawning as he did, and placed his hat down next to him. Cassidy, can I ask you a question?" Izuku asked in Japanese, with the cowboy responding with a tired nod. Do you and Ash have history? I'm just confused since you worked with Overwatch from a young age, and they've been a gangster from a young age," Izuku nervously asked, looking back to Ash's boat to see if she was potentially listening in but didn't see her. "Nah, maybe another time, kid. It's a long story, and I'm tired," Cassidy yawned, scratching his beard before laying down, putting his head on top of his red cloth that wrapped around his shoulders and back. "Well, can you tell me what? He's just like you? What did that mean?" Izuku questioned further, too curious to accept defeat for tonight and head off to sleep. Cassidy sighed, grabbing his hat and placing it over his eyes, barely leaving his nose exposed. "Because your backgrounds are almost identical. You both have rich parents, and they both neglected you for the same reason too," Cassidy drawled, his words beginning to slur as he yawned again. Izuku's eyes widened and his body tense at Cassidy's implications. But it couldn't be true, could it? "Wait, is Ash also quirkless?" Izuku asked in a hushed whisper, getting on his knees while staring down at Cassidy with wide eyes. Yeah, but I wouldn't worry too much about. Focus on getting some sleep, kid. We're going to be on the move again tomorrow, Cassidy stated. Izuku was in shock. He in his miserable 14 years of existence has never met another quirkless person. He's only ever heard of a few from the internet, those ones being Gabriel Reyes, Angela Ziegler, and Melissa Shield, the daughter of a massive support gear company owner. But Ash, a renowned criminal, was just like him? Several thoughts came into Izuku's head, further confusing him and causing him to become even more distraught. He looked over to Ash's boat from just the number of thoughts before snapping his eyes away. Slowly, he stood up and started dragging his feet towards another boat. With all of these new thoughts in his head, how was he supposed to get a good night's rest? Toshinori, your son was spotted with an ex-Overwatch agent Jesse McCree and renowned American villain Calamity Ash in a service station at Defanimu in the Hanamura sector. I suggest you come down to the station. Toshinori sighed and rubbed his free hand over his face and through his hair. What had his son gotten into? Naomasa, a trusted friend of his who knew of his secret, just contacted him about his missing son case, and his worst fear had just been confirmed. Izuku was trying to make contact with Overwatch. He doubted anything would come of it. Overwatch was a ruined company from half a decade ago, but he didn't want his son to have any association with them. But it was all his fault. If he wasn't so tunnel-visioned on Izumi and noticed his son, he wouldn't have felt abandoned. Izumi would also have not believed it was her job to belittle and torment him whenever given the chance because of his quirkless status. Toshinori learned of her wrongdoings while interrogating her in the car while driving to where she and her friends had last seen him. She cracked and confessed her, and her closest friends bullied him if given the chance and commonly knocked him out cold with their quirks. He was infuriated at her, but couldn't bring himself to give her a proper punishment. It was entirely his fault that she became like this, and Izuku's mindset had been warped. She's grounded and must get B's or higher on her report card to get her allowance, but it wasn't enough to teach her a lesson, so when Toshinori brings Izuku home, he'll put her through rigorous training with her quirk to make her understand what she did was wrong and what it takes to be a hero. Finding Izuku wasn't just a want, but a need. His son was broken and confused, choosing to idolize the terrorist group Overwatch instead of Japan's many heroes, and Toshinori couldn't blame him. Izuku wanted someone who believed in him since no one else would. So naturally, a successful high-ranking quirkless Overwatch agent would be a prime target for a struggling kid's adoration. His trust in heroes would obviously dwindle thanks to his sister and friends, also wanting to be heroes yet treat him like dirt. But Toshinori could fix him. He knew he could. He'd bring Izuku home and get him into therapy and get him out of his toxic school environment. He'd enroll him into a support gear course since he clearly was a genius at making gadgets, and he was sure he could get his old friend David Shield to help him. Interacting with another quirkless individual would also help Izuku, as David had a quirkless daughter, Melissa. Yes, I'll be there, Toshinori told Naomasa, standing up and heading for the door. He'd already talked to his wife about this, but hasn't had the chance to contact the Todorokis or Yaoyorozus. But he would be giving them a firm scolding. Okay, see you soon, Naomasa said before hanging up. Toshinori breathed a sigh and steeled himself. Naomasa was a great friend of his, but he'd have to be careful. He lied about Izuku being kidnapped, and if his lie is discovered, Izuku would be sent to jail and his actions as a parent and hero would come into question. So, he'd have to be careful while conversing with Naomasa since his quirk made him a human lie detector. But he would succeed, for his and Izuku's sake. Izuku ummed in discomfort as he sluggishly rolled around in the small cranny the boat had. He had surrounded himself in the blankets on the small dingy he found himself sleeping in, but none of them were comfortable. The blankets he was stuck with were incredibly uncomfortable. They were thin and itchy, and felt like they were peeling his face off every time he rubbed against them. Izuku shuffled himself still half asleep, but ended up hitting his head against the wood roof above his head. Izuku yelped and lowered his head down to the ground and feverishly rubbing the back of his head with his hands. Whatever sleepiness that was still running through his body immediately vanished, and Izuku sighed as the pain subsided. He smacked his lips as he pushed himself out from the hole. He crammed himself into to keep warm. Izuku craned his body around and stretched, cracking most of his bones in the process. His bones were quite stiff, and he was certainly in pain from the ungodly way he found himself sleeping last night. Izuku looked around and found the boathouse he, Cassidy, and Ash ended up sleeping in. It was still dark as the holes around the walls clearly indicated to Izuku, but he had thought that it would have been much darker. Perhaps because so much light was cracking in from the outside, it rendered the boathouse's shelter void. Izuku got up his boat, slightly, rocking as he did. Izuku carefully crawled out of the boat like he was a toddler because he was terrified of accidentally hitting the drink below and completely embarrassing himself. Izuku flopped onto the cement dock and sighed with relief. He inhaled sharply and stumbled onto his feet, dragging his bag with him. He looked around and didn't see either Ash or Cassidy, but Bob was still sitting by the entrance, his mechanical eyes shut by metal eyelets. He didn't even know that some Omnics had that. Izuku assumed that the other two were asleep. Bob would be gone if Ash hightailed it, and Cassidy wouldn't have left him, right? A wave of fear and anxiety crept over Izuku as his sense of being uncared about returned over him. Slowly, Izuku tiptoed towards Cassidy's boat and stood as tall as he could to peer into it. Cassidy was laying comfortably down the bottom of the boat, his legs resting on the seat and his head laying on ropes with his hat covering his face. It was drowning out his snores, and Izuku could see his hat shake from them. Breathing a sigh of relief, Izuku slumped down and walked away, his breath slightly shallow. Izuku felt stupid for thinking that Cassidy would up and leave. He was kind enough to take Izuku on this wild ride away from his cruel family. Why would he randomly ditch him after the second night? Izuku prided himself in his ingenuity and logical thinking, as it was really the only thing he had. Take away his intelligence, and he became a short, lean, and scruffy quirkless kid whose best attribute is to be used as a punching bag for everyone else. Because of that, Izuku's faith in himself, and especially the others around him, are minuscule. From personal experience, if someone has a reason to betray him, they will. So Izuku's logic sometimes gets overwhelmed by his feelings of doubt, worry, and frustration. Another reason he was so interested in building his gadgets. He may have started from his idolization of Overwatch, but he continued to build them even after the company's disbandment because it was an escape from reality and removed his emotions getting in the way of his judgment. So, while his emotions were sky high, he would enter his realm of tinkering. Like right now, Izuku was stressed by literally being hunted down by the police, hanging around a wanted ex-Overwatch agent and the most wanted woman in America. Izuku was terrified, but he had to keep himself together, so he would just spend some time adjusting his gadgets. Izuku went near the front of the warehouse and set his bag down. Unzipping his bag and grabbing his things, Izuku pulled out his metal canister, water bottle, a green pencil case, and a black bag and began to look over them. He opened his small black bag first and started counting his Jolt tokens and scanning them over to tell if they were still functional without risking the need to test them. He was still saddened at losing one of his tokens. Going from 10 to after he was satisfied, Izuku got his CRB glasses and put them on. He created a panel in front of him like a table, and he took off his shoe and placed it on top. However, his shoe instantly activated as it touched the CRB. The transparent blue barrier shattered, and the boot shot high into the air, bouncing off the metal beam before falling back down. Izuku didn't expect his moon boot to immediately launch upwards. He thought he needed to put weight on it for it to work. It had worked like that before, so maybe his constant casual use wore down the protective system he had in place. Izuku crawled a couple meters away and retrieved his boot and rolled back to where he was before. Izuku inspected his boot's sole and found that the thin protective plastic that he encoded with nearly invisible binary that would allow him to walk over CRB barriers but cause a magnetic repulsion reaction as soon as he jumped had been scrubbed and burned down so much that the binary was invisible to the CRB, so the reaction of repulsion his moon boots create would always occur. He didn't have the heat press he made in his room, so his moon boots would function automatically until he could replace the plastic. He'd also have to work out that K&K when fixing it, otherwise it just will become a reoccurring problem. Izuku scratched his chin as he thought about what he was going to do when an idea hit his head. He reached for his metal canister and quickly unscrewed the lid and pulled out his tiny robotic friend, Minnie. Izuku put Minnie down next to him, his creation standing up on its own. Izuku wiped off a bit of dust he saw on its screen before clearing his throat. "Hello, Minnie," Izuku said quietly, not wanting to disturb the still sleeping Ash and Cassidy. Minnie, Izuku's small robot, burst into life, the screen displaying a blue smiley face. The head of the robot tilted slightly, and it seemed to stare up at Izuku. "Hello. Today will be a great day, Izuku," Minnie said innocently, reciting one of Izuku's programmed phrases. "Minnie, I need you to take a note for me," Izuku told the robot. Minnie's screen blipped into a flat blue color before morphing into a pixelated image of a microphone. Izuku could probably make Minnie more responsive by adding sound effects, but he'll cross that bridge when he starts working on Minnie again. "Fix the problem of the plastic binary cover on the moon boot because it wears out after use," Izuku said. Minnie's sweet AI voice replayed what Izuku had said before a checkmark appeared on the screen. Izuku giggled in delight. He hadn't gotten to test many of Minnie's features as he had only programmed Minnie's voice a few days ago. In fact, the morning before he ran away, got stuck in a wooden crate. "That's pretty cool," a careful voice spoke behind Izuku. The bushy green-haired kid whipped his head around with saucers for eyes as he looked up like a child caught doing something naughty. Ash stood behind Izuku, towering over his hunched sitting figure. Izuku tried not to shake nor move his eyes away as he felt that it would only anger the white-haired gangster. Izuku silently nodded, his teeth clenched shut to keep his lips from quivering. He wanted to look around for Cassidy but felt that would annoy Ash, so he kept his eyes glued towards her. Ash narrowed her eyes and her nose crinkled, causing Izuku to stop breathing. Her eyes moved away from Izuku and started scanning the collection of junk Izuku laid out in front of him. Ash crouched down, becoming closer in height to Izuku. Izuku regretfully couldn't stop his compulsion to lean away when she did this, afraid that she may suddenly attack him. "What's in the pencil case?" Ash asked, causing Izuku to twist his head back to sit on his neck naturally. Inside the green pencil case was his EMP, an incredibly ugly device that Izuku had no idea to make more aesthetically pleasing without ruining its functionality. He was nervous of showing it off, the fear of being judged for the hideous invention and worry that she may take interest of the idea of his EMP. EMPs are quite powerful gadgets, especially for villains, and if Ash wanted to try something with it, Izuku knew he wouldn't be able to stop her. Izuku started cautiously as he tentatively reached towards the case, buying time for him to think of his next words, especially since he needs to speak in English. "It doesn't look good, but it operates." It is an EMP device," Izuku stuttered, choosing to neglect greater details in hopes she judges the device's power by its looks. Ash stares at the plate covered in wire, copper, and plastic as Izuku pulls it out her head. Once she sees it as she is clearly confused by the design. "I've got no idea what I'm looking at, but you're clearly smarter than me, little bush," Ash said with a smile that surprised Izuku. She reached over and pat Izuku's shoulder, making him freeze at her proximity before wincing in pain. Katsuki's burn was something Izuku had forgotten about. He was used to his bruises and burns being agitated afterwards by Katsuki and Izumi's gang. But he hasn't had the chance to patch up his probably infected wound since he got it, so it surprisingly stung. "Huh, are you hurt?" Ash asked, reeling her hand back quickly. Izuku put the EMP down and raised his hand to hover over the oversized jacket Cassidy had given him to hide his Aldera school uniform. Slowly, he slipped the jacket away from his shoulder, which wasn't hard as it didn't fit him in the first place. He exposed the wispy fabric that had shot away from his shoulder, allowing the nasty red burn to breathe against the early morning's cool air. "Yeah, I haven't had a chance to actually fix it. I fell asleep quickly after meeting Cassidy and had to go early in the morning. Besides, I had kind of forgotten about it." Izuku laughed weakly before covering the jacket over his shoulder again. He looked away from Ash and down at his gadgets and slowly started putting them away. He felt vulnerable under Ash's gaze, and his natural fear of others' judgment was making him far too nervous, and that wasn't even factoring her villain status. "We should probably get that checked out, kid," Ash muttered, and Izuku took the opportunity to gulp as he was no longer facing. The next few seconds were tense for Izuku as he packed his things back into his bag and started to put his moon boot back on in silence, as Ash sat about a meter away from him. "Okay, look, Midoriya, I want to know what it was like," Ash spoke, startling Izuku and turning around to face. Izuku was confused as he slowly started to shake. Would he have to answer questions about Cassidy? If so, he wouldn't know many of the answers, And if he did, would she even believe Izuku? He knew Cassidy wasn't a bad person, but Ash clearly has bad BLD with the man. Was it from a mission that two had met and Cassidy ended up betraying her as he was an Overwatch agent? That was the best guess Izuku had as to how the two would have met each other, but he felt that if that were the case, Ash would be in jail or Cassidy would have a bullet between his eyes. Maybe they had history before he joined Overwatch. They were both from America and had a knack to use more old-fashioned guns despite clear superior options. Could that be a correlation or a coincidence? Can't know what was like. Izuku stuttered and he felt his face drain of color as Ash bit her lip and glared at his fearful stuttering question. The white-haired cowgirl closed her eyes and raised a shaking hand close to her head. She audibly exhaled through her nose and let the tension in her hand slip away before opening her eyes to give Izuku a serious expression. What it was like being quirkless. I have never met another quirkless person before, not even an elderly. I've heard of a few, but I didn't exactly like them. Overwatch agents and that Melissa Beach, Ash said with a mostly straight face, until she mentioned the other quirkless people she had heard of and said it with great disdain. Oh, Izuku voiced, realization hitting him strongly. He had completely forgot of what Cassidy had told him about Ash last night, that she was quirkless just like him and might also have hero parents, or at least rich parents. Quirkless. Had anyone ever suspected the calamity Ash of being a quirkless weakling? Izuku would have definitely read articles about her lack of quirk, or at bare minimum, memes of American heroes not being able to catch a single quirkless cowgirl that only uses old weaponry to defeat enemies. Surely the American government have to know that she is quirkless. They'd have her BRTH record, right? Although this is something the government may want to hide, as it would be an embarrassment if it came to light that their most notorious villain is quirkless. Ah, stupid Izuku, stop going off track. Ash asked you a question. Izuku condemned himself in his mind. Sorry, Izuku chuckled, trying to shake off the probably long pause he had. He really hoped he hadn't been muttering. That would make this situation even more awkward. He looked Ash up in the eyes and shuddered at her baffled expression. He definitely had. Sorry, it's a bad habit, Izuku admitted. But the boy managed to find some courage in himself and started speaking. Well, I don't think I have spoken to my parents in over 6 years, and that hasn't been from a lack of trying. I still had lived in their house, but they had never acknowledged I was around, never cooking dinner for me, not taking me to school, and several other things among that. My dad is also a pro hero. Actually, he is Japan's #1 hero, All Might. You wouldn't be able to tell if I showed you an image of them side by side, though. Izuku hollowly chuckled as he spoke about his past to a person who stole from everything with money. Ash was staring at him with hot intensity, which Izuku could feel despite his refusal to look up at her. He was just too terrified. I also have a sister, twin sister, but she has a powerful quirk. She is adored by our parents for it, and praised at school while I get beaten down. This may sound like bragging, but I know I'm smart academically. However, her test scores are always higher than mine, even though she has never studied once in her life, while mine rarely are passing. The school was against me as well, swapping me and my siblings' test results and turning a blind eye to all the times I get beaten down at school. My sister and the rest of my classmates loved to abuse me, but the worst was my old friend, who seemed to take it as a personal offense when I was announced quirkless. Like he was somehow dirted from the fact he had ever associated with me. This had pretty much cemented a few days after I turned 4 and continued to. Well, today, my classmates laughed at me when the teacher told the class I was striving for UA, purposefully neglecting the Part-1 wanted to be in the support course, causing an uproar of laughter and giving a reason for my old friend to give me this burn. Then my sister enlisted the help of her friends to try and beat me down too, only I managed to run away. I hid in a crate in the back of a hover truck that apparently was owned by Yakuza members, forcing me to stay hiding in the crate until Cassidy hijacked it. Now I'm here, on the run, as my father twisted the story to make me a young boy getting ins with weapon dealers and other things. Izuku explained to Ash, really laying down the complete summary of his life. It wasn't detail, but he didn't want to bore her. He only had negative things to say anyway. The only nice things he had were either destroyed by his sister's gang, or they were currently in his yellow bag. He doubted she'd care about his realized passion for Overwatch and inventions either. Ash hummed, giving Izuku an inkling of thought Ash currently had. Izuku chanced his luck to peek up at Ash and saw that she was leaning back on her arms, looking up at the roof with a leering smile, her eyes and mouth opposing each other greatly in expression. Guess it's just not an American thing. Fing hell, I hate the judgment and the apparent shame we supposedly bring for simply existing, Ash complained with a fierce growl. Izuku could help but be scared of her as she talked, even though he could tell that her anger wasn't directed at him. Ash scoffed and put on another contrasting smile and stared down at Izuku, causing him to tense up. You already could tell that something was wrong before. I heard it while you were muttering. I didn't give myself the name Calamity, Ash. The news did, as my parents refused to claim knowledge that the bank robber was me. Hell, no one knows I exist since my parents refused to go out of the house with me in tow, afraid they'd lose their status if it was discovered I was born quirkless. That's why they don't have a clue of my apparent quirk or true name. My parents refuse claim ownership of the problem they caused. Fing posing wealth-hungry badgers, Ash snarled before spitting on the spot next to her. The only thing Izuku could do was nod in response, not wanting to further enrage the cowgirl. Ash sighed and stood up, stretching her arms and back. Ash looked around, a curious glint in her eyes before she looked down at Izuku. She sighed, lowering her head and taking her hat off. Sorry, I'm generally an angry person. I'm not upset at you if that's what you're thinking, and since we're probably going to be stuck together for the foreseeable future, I want us to get along, Ash said, and this time gave a sincere smile. Izuku's eyes widened at that. Ash right now looked kind and gentle despite her malicious and sharp exterior she had before. If it wasn't for her gangster clothing, someone might have been fooled to think that Ash was a gentle person. Yeah, I'd like to get along, Izuku managed to say. Ash's smile seemed to gleam brighter, and she lowered her hand down to Izuku. Hey, what do you say we take a better look around these boats? Check to see if they have any spare parts for your gadgets, Ash grinned cheekily. Izuku looked around at the boats. None looked particularly good condition, or even used in a while. Izuku perfectly understood what she meant. She wanted to steal. Izuku has stolen before, but he always kept it to a minimum. He didn't want to inconvenience any other unfortunate soul, and doing bad things was never in his realm of interests. But he was currently being hunted as a villain thanks to his father and probably sister. He was hanging around an ex-Overwatch agent that the Japan government want eradicated immediately, and America's Calamity Ash. He may as well. Cassidy yawned, action causing a chain reaction in the rest of his body to stretch. The man tried to move the rest of his body, but found himself mostly constricted. He huffed and removed his hat over his head with his mechanical arm and looked at his awkward position in the boat he fell asleep in. He grunted and struggled to get himself up. Turns out it's difficult to get your body up if your head and legs are on a higher level than the rest of your body. Also, a rocking surface doesn't help. Cassidy gets on his knees and places his fleshy hand on the side of the boat to help him stand. Cassidy puts his hat back on and looks around, noticing the boathouse was currently far better illuminated than what he had expected. He looked around, unconsciously looking to see if the others were awake, and his eyes widened. Most of the boats had several pieces of themselves floating on the water or laying on the dock. Bob was holding one high above his head, and had a large brown sack tied around their neck and hung over his back. Ash had Bob facing away from her as she stood on a boat, and pushed some items into the sack on his back, while Izuku was meticulously picking mechanical parts and placing them in his bag. Cassidy rubbed his eyes, unsure if he was seeing things, but it did not change his view when he looked again. Cassidy ended up laughing as he stepped out of his boat, his laugh catching the attention of Bob, Ash, and Izuku. Izuku froze, Bob waved, and Ash scowled. Looks like Sleeping Beauty finally decided to grace us with his presence, Ash spat, crossing her arms over her chest. Cassidy chuckled in response. Well, I didn't believe low enough that you two would steal from rickety old boats, Cassidy replied before yawning again and trotting towards the boathouse's door. Izuku felt nervous. He didn't like stealing things, and now he felt self-conscious of his foul actions. While these boats haven't been used in a long time, it wouldn't be hurting anyone by taking the little valuables, Izuku spoke out, trying to defend himself. Cassidy laughs again and dismissively waves his hand over his shoulder. You're fine, Midoriya. I don't care what you do. As long as nothing serious happens, I won't hold it against you, Cassidy told Izuku. The cowboy then reached the door and slowly pried it open, resting his face against it so he could see out of while trying to reveal as little of himself as possible. After a couple of seconds of watching, He shuts the door and turns to look at his three companions who are all giving curious glances. Cassidy always appreciated that Ash had upgraded Bob to have expression on his usual blank face. People are about, which is annoying, but that gives us the chance to sneak into one of the other places to find out when and where the Kyoto barge is rolling into port, Cassidy stated. Izuku became even more confused while Ash gave him a wicked glare and incredulously eyed him. Barge, give us a proper explanation into what the F is going on, Ash demanded, her foot tapping on the boat loudly, showing her impatience. Cassidy mostly annoyed it while Izuku shuffled away from her and made himself smaller. The man we're trying to find is Jinji's brother, Hanzo. They are also the last remaining two members of the Shimada clan, Cassidy said, looking over towards the two. The last two words made Izuku's ears twitch, and he perked up and stared fully down at Cassidy. The Shimada clan? Izuku voiced, completely taken by surprise. Cassidy holds up his metal hand, as if to tell Izuku to stop. I know you have a lot to say on that. You probably have the entire Wikipedia memorized, but trust me, that knowledge barely matters. What you need to know now is that with the Shimada clan gone, a new clan, or Yakuza, has formed and is taking over old Shimada households and industries called the Hashimoto clan and is aligning themselves to build more power with a growing Yakuza clan called the Shai Hisaikai. Hanzo wants to stop this to put the legacy of the Shimada to rest, and apparently the incoming barge has supplies for the Hashimoto clan that Hanzo wants to stop, Cassidy explained to the others. Ash looked completely confused and sneered at him. First of all, what does this one man think he'll achieve, and second of all, how do you know this? You were never the planning type, Ash accused, using Bob to hop off the boat and start approaching him. Well, Jinji gave me a bit of help when he asked me for help a couple of months back. But I will admit, someone has been helping me with information, Cassidy admitted, not being intimidated at Ash's aggressive approach as she stomped next to him, only stopping once she was right under his nose. Who is source of information? Ash asked, drawing out her words passive-aggressively. Her name is Sombra, and trust me, she's nothing but bad news, Cassidy sighed, clearly becoming tired with Ash's hostile attitude. Izuku's eyes widened at the name Sombra. It was the name Cassidy frustratingly muttered at the tan-skinned woman wearing black and purple clothing that appeared during his gunfight with the gang members. Ugh, Ash groaned, dramatically, rolling her eyes and gripping her nose between her fingers. All right, Cass, what's going to happen when you talk to this Hanzo guy, and what are we doing when that's finished? Ash annoyingly asked, although it was a question that Izuku himself was curious about as well. What was going to happen with him and Cassidy once he finally talked to Jinji's brother? Well, I'll give him a choice. He gives an answer, and if he says yes or no, he'll keep doing his thing. Then all of us will get the hell out of Japan by escaping with Overwatch, Cassidy answered. At this point, Izuku's mouth fell open. Hitch a ride with Overwatch. Were they still active? No. Impossible. Any Overwatch action would have had them arrested and even executed in a few countries. Did he mean an old friend would give them a ride? However, while Izuku was having these thoughts and the small feeling of hope of getting to meet more of his heroes, Ash was about to pull a BLD vessel as she gave Cassidy a look of absolute outrage. What are you insane? Like hell I'm going to have anything to do with those international reckless pigs, Ash shouted. Cassidy quickly put his hand over Ash's mouth and aggressively told her to shush with a finger over his own lips. This had to be the first time Izuku has seen Cassidy look anything but relaxed, cheeky, or bored. You don't have a choice right now, Ash. Security cameras have caught footage with you, and Japanese heroes have a lot freer range of actions and pick up where American heroes slack. Unless you want to go on a rampage, you're stuck here, going to get arrested and shipped back to America, where you'll spend the rest of your days rotting in a maximum security prison cell. I'll be honest, I had no intention of rejoining Overwatch when they sent out the recall. I was done, but now after my incidents with Izuku and now you, this is the best course of action to keep us all safe, Ash, Cassidy said strongly, his voice becoming more confident as he talked to Ash. The aggressive woman's face was red, and it seemed that she wanted to bark back at Cassidy, but reluctantly held her tongue. Ash dropped her head, no longer facing Cassidy. There was a tense moment of silence as everyone stayed dead still, waiting to see who would make the next move. I haven't even been able to do anything in the last 2 years, Ash said harshly, but her voice was far less pronounced as before, like she was embarrassed. Cassidy tilted his head at her words. Me and the Deadlocks have only been able to mug the people attacking us. We haven't been able to settle down since the authorities have sent so many people after us. The heist you stopped us from doing 5 months ago has been the only act we've committed in those past 2 years. The other stuff has been propaganda spread by the media, either framed or the government is straight up lying. Either way, it costed the rest of my family their lives as we got caught in a fight between the army and Talon. Me and Bob barely managed to escape with our heads, and since we had nothing left, I thought we may as well try our bets at tracking you to hit gold or something, Ash admitted, looking to the side and away from Cassidy, nervously rubbing her elbow. Cassidy looks down at her, his expression becoming sympathetic. He reaches his hand down and comfortingly rubs her shoulder. I'm sorry that's happened, I truly am, Ash. But my point still stands. Even if we get a boat right now and know exactly how to drive to the nearest plot of land, Japan's heroes will have caught up to us and sink us before we even reach shore. I'm sure I can convince my old friends to not judge you and treat you badly if that makes you feel any better. Cassidy tries to console Ash. Izuku was just overall confused at what was going on. These two definitely have some kind of history with each other. But what? Was Cassidy a law enforcement guy before Overwatch? But Cassidy also used to go by Jesse McCree while he worked in Overwatch. Why would that be the case? Wait. Could Cassidy have been part of Ash's Deadlock gang? Let's just hurry up and go. I feel suffocated in this stupid place, Ash complains, sliding away from Cassidy and moving towards the door. Cassidy lowers his hand and looks down with disappointment. He then looks back up to Izuku and motions for him to come over. Izuku comes back to his senses and moves over to the side of the boat. Bob decides to help and grabs Izuku by the waist, lifting him out of the boat and placing him gently down next to him. Izuku then jogs towards Cassidy and Ash. Bob follows along, but his steps were thunderous compared to Izuku's on the wooden plank floor, and his mechanics were audible every time he moved his legs. Wait, I thought Overwatch had disbanded. Are they back and running again? Izuku asked, trying to withhold his excitement as he asked Cassidy. The cowboy smirked and ruffled Izuku's hair as he ran up to them. Overwatch gave a recall message to all ex-Overwatch agents about 5 months ago. I didn't want to join but knew they needed help, so I got an old friend that had been locked up for a while out so they could help assist Overwatch's reunion. But with how things have changed, we'll hopefully get to meet them soon, Cassidy said with a slight hesitation at the second sentence. But Izuku just buzzed excitedly. Cassidy rolled his eyes and peered out the door, waiting for the perfect time to sneak out and find another place to hide in and hopefully find information about the incoming barge that Hanzo was planning to intercept. It had taken a while for the group to move anywhere. So many people now roamed around that it would be hard to navigate without being spotted. Undoubtedly, they would get recognized immediately. Izuku no longer had a working phone and both Ash and Cassidy didn't own one. However, Bob could connect to news networks and televise them by a pad on his right arm. Ash couldn't use it as she couldn't speak Japanese, but Izuku knew how to navigate it. Safe to say that they knew how badly the Japanese police force was after them. Izuku was terrified if his father found him as he knew All Might was on the case. The four had to dive into the water and maneuver around the bay to avoid being spotted. Bob kindly held Izuku's bag above the water and lifted his sack of stolen things as they carefully navigated in the shallow water, hiding under fishing docks and using the boats to hide from people. They were all getting agitated at the extended PRD of time they had been trapped in the sea, especially Ash. It took them about 2 hours before they found something promising. 2 large docks spread far apart for each other near other. Shipping crates not far away and a hut at the start of one of the docks had what seemed to be a timetable on the side. Finally, Ash gushed in relief, shivering from the cold that she was feeling from being in the water for too long. She could hardly feel her legs at this point. Cassidy swam forward and poked his head above the dock. Not many people around, which would mean an opportunity would arrive soon. All right, here's the plan. Izuku and I will go up there, see the time, and check if there is a way in. Ash, try and get Bob up the alley over there. I can see a vending machine, so you can probably nick something from there, Cassidy said, turning around to look at the group. Izuku nodded and Ash temperamentally huffed, trying to wipe wet strands of hair out of her face, and Bob mechanically nodded his head. When the coast was clear, Cassidy and Izuku got out of the water while Ash and Bob swam to a better place to hide out. The two boys helped each other move as quietly as possible and snuck towards the reception area for shipping docks. I have no idea what it is called. The two got closer and quickly heard a loud, raspy voice talking with someone else, the second person appearing to be over the phone. "It's okay, boss. The barge is coming in at around 1 in the morning. I can't exactly speed it up." Yes, I'll keep the coast clear, boss. You don't have to worry about not 10, the man drawled. Izuku and Cassidy looked towards each other, the older of the two shrugging. Cassidy began to look around to side, looking at the timetable and any other relevant information. Izuku, however, has his curiosity peaking again as the man who was clearly a part of the Hashimoto clan continued to talk loudly. Didn't this mean that everyone around here worked under the clan if he was being so open about what he was saying? Izuku slowly leered around the building and looked through the window. He saw a man with large and overdone black hair that was swirled far past over their head. He was leaning back in his chair and twisting himself back and forth with his foot on his desk. Izuku looked around and noticed that the window he was looking through was broken. A small chunk, barely big enough to squeeze his hand through, was present at the bottom of the window. Beneath the little hole in the room was a row of keys, and Izuku felt himself drawn to them. Slowly, Izuku pushes his hand through the window, his eyes glancing up at the man and back down at the keys. The sharp edges of the window barely miss Izuku's hand, and his fingers twitch as he pushes his index and middle in between a key. Squeezing his fingers together as tightly as possible, Izuku begins to pull his hand away with the key. His eyes begin to settle on the man as slowly drags his hand away, but as he feels glass poke at his bare skin, he pauses and looks down. "Damn it!" the Yakuza member shouts, slamming his hand against the desk. The sudden action frightens Izuku, and he rips his hand out from the window and immediately wincing, his other hand coming up to cover the small cut that he now had on his hand. With fear, Izuku looks back up to the man, but sees that he isn't occupied with Izuku, instead about something on his phone. With relief, Izuku ducks his head away and gets Cassidy's attention, the cowboy looking down at him worriedly. "What happened?" Cassidy whispered. "Nothing. Look, I got a boat key," Izuku quietly exclaimed, lifting the key up proudly, showing the orange tag with a number on it. Cassidy looks at it and smirks, ruffling Izuku's now wet hair. "Good on you, kid. Let's hurry up and go before we get spotted," Cassidy replied, hurrying away. Izuku follows, and the two get back in the water slowly to avoid making noise. Now the two started drifting towards the direction Ash and Bob had headed. "Hey, can I ask you something, Cassidy?" Izuku asked, deciding that this would be the best opportunity to ask. Cassidy turned and looked at Izuku with a raised eyebrow and nodded his head. Were you a part of Ash's Deadlock gang?" Izuku asked. Cassidy wheezed and slapped his hand over his mouth. The man was in shock but got over it and sighed with a sad smile. "Yeah, a long time ago," Cassidy replied, obviously getting lost in memories. Izuku debated questioning further, but he was just too curious. "What happened? Were you too close?" Izuku asked. "Yeah, you could say that," Cassidy huffed, turning to face Izuku with neutral expression, but he was clearly trying to hold his sadness back. "I used to be a part of the gang, practically started it with her. But I got caught, given the choice to join Overwatch or rot in prison for the next 40 years. Then when the company disbanded, I had changed. I could have gone back to the gang, but I wouldn't be able to do the same things I had before. My moral compass wouldn't allow me. So, I never returned, and that's created a hostile rift between us two," Cassidy explained as they approached shore. The cowboy looked around and ducked back down as someone walked by, but as soon as they were gone, pulled himself onto land. "Do you still care for her?" Izuku asked. Cassidy paused, his entire body freezing. Izuku feared he may have gone too far and looked away, kind of upset with himself for making Cassidy upset. "Dearly," was Cassidy's reply. He got out of the water and helped Izuku out after him. The two ran towards the alleyway Cassidy had told Ash and Bob to head, passing the alleyway. When they entered, they saw Ash with an old green towel wrapped around her shoulders, holding a large cookie in her hand. When she saw them, she jerked her head towards Bob. "Got you two some as well?" Ash grumbled. Then Bob extended his hand, showing the two cookies. "Aw, thank you, Ash," Cassidy smiled, happily accepting the two cookies and passing one back to Izuku. The young boy took the cookie, but was surprised by Cassidy's quick mood change. "Also, I have good news with a bit of bad news," Cassidy told Ash. Ash glared and her shoulders slumped when she heard that. We know when the barge is coming. Unfortunately, it is 1 a.m. tomorrow, Cassidy explained, and Ash clearly didn't like that. What? So, we have to be sitting idly in this stupid thing alleyway until tomorrow? Ash growled out. Well, this time we a proper boat, thanks to Midoriya. Cassidy replied, then motioned towards Izuku. Shy but proud, Izuku raised the keys with the orange tag with a number hanging off of it. And by going off of that, I believe our vessel is that one there, Cassidy says, leaning out of the alley and pointing towards a boat. Ash stands up and walks next to him and gasps when she sees it. Cassidy rams the keys in and starts the boat and drives away from the Habor. Izuku laughs at the wind in his hair, and Ash relaxes in a chair with Bob resting next to her, his bulky arms behind his head. Cassidy drives the boat away, positioning it far away from harbor, but close enough to still be able to see the dock the barge is going to come in with. Cassidy drops the anchor and stretches before he heads down to the others. He opens the door and sits down at a chair next to the others. The chairs were all pointing towards a circular table, and he had an idea on how to pass the time. They had over 12 hours to wait, and other than the cookies they had eaten earlier, none of them would be able to get food, so they had to figure out how to pass the time. Found this board game on board. How about we try and pass the time? Cassidy asked. Ash cracked her eye open and looked at the box he held in his hand. I already told you. I've got no idea how to read nor speak Japanese, Ash spat. However, Izuku gleamed. Oh, I love this game. I haven't been able to play it in a while. I can try and teach you if you want, Ash. The game mostly uses pictures anyway, Izuku pled with the woman. Ash blinked, her mood shifting when Izuku talked to her. I guess I could try, Ash slowly answered, sitting up in her chair, and Bob mimicked. Cassidy smiled and sat down, putting the box down in front of them and getting ready to play the game. Night had rolled over, and Izuku had fallen asleep. He had a few hours until they had to do something, and apparently Cassidy and Ash were going to take shifts, but he didn't know how likely that would actually turn out. He yawned and sat up, wiping his eyes. Clearly the stress of the situation of him going onto a large boat with several criminals didn't sit well with the green net. Looking around, he saw that Ash was polishing her gun, while resting against Bob, and Cassidy was nowhere to be found. The cowgirl looked over to Izuku, noticing that he woke up and smiled. Rise and shine. Good timing. If the barge is coming on time, it should be here in few minutes, Ash told Izuku. Izuku wispily nodded and looked around. Where's Cassidy? Izuku asked. He's gone to take a leak. He'll be back soon, Ash said, now putting powder in what looked to be a stick of dynamite. Izuku nodded and sat up, allowing his thoughts to run wild again. His mind was brought back to his confrontation with Cassidy earlier today when he asked about his past relation with Ash. He seemed to be full of regret, but was unwilling to try and talk to Ash about it. She did act very stubborn and aggressive, but Cassidy clearly had this eating away at him. Izuku noticed that Ash was absent-mindedly looking back up at the door, like she is waiting for something, or specifically someone. This might a long shot, but she could still care for Cassidy, maybe like how Cassidy cares for her. He did really want to help Cassidy. He owes a lot to the Western. It would be nice to do something good for the man. To do something useful? Was he also a part of your deadlock gang? Izuku asked, starting the conversation. Ash pauses and looks over to Izuku quizzically. Izuku feels himself shrink. Sorry, you two clearly have some kind of history, and that is the only thing in my mind that made sense, Izuku nervously explained. Ash scoffed and whipped her hair around. Yeah, but we ran right into a trap and Overwatch caught him. Then he started working for them, Ash said in a low tone. Izuku nodded his head, wrapping his brain around how he would approach this situation. Play dumb? Like a deal? He worked for them to prevent going to jail? Izuku asked. Ash shrugged, pulling out a second gun now that resembled a shotgun. Izuku didn't realize she had that. Probably, but what I don't understand is why he didn't come back. Not try and escape or return when Overwatch was exposed for fraud, cover-up, and Blackwatch's dirty missions, Ash growled, her fierce red eyes narrowing to a glare at the door. Izuku gulped. She clearly was angry at this but did believe it was a little unfounded. But he supposes that when someone you care about leaves and never tries to come back, you'll feel some sort of resentment. Probably how she feels about her parents and how he feels about his family and friends. But wouldn't it have been risky for him to come back? If his escape plan failed, he'd just be thrown into prison. If he got back to the gang, a higher priority target would have been placed on you all, endangering you lot. That would include him coming back when Overwatch disbanded. Izuku said like he had just come up with it. But in reality, he already knew this and was trying to help Ash understand a bit more of Cassidy's point of view. It did seem to work. Ash's hard stare lessened, and her features scrunched up in thought. He doubted he fully swayed her. Izuku didn't even know the full story, and she definitely had a right to be furious at Cassidy. But it doesn't seem like they've talked about it, or even brought it up. Izuku just wants to help with that. He seems like he still cares about you. Sorry if this is unwanted or random, but I felt like I should put what I thought out there, Izuku admitted nervously. Ash looked shocked and moved her head to look at Izuku again. She opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by Cassidy walking through the door. Immediately her mouth snapped shut, and she leaned back against Bob. I hope she considers, Izuku thought to himself, turning to look at Cassidy. Ah, you're awake, Midoriya. You might as well get your stuff ready. The barge should be on its dash. Oh, no, it's here, Cassidy called out, pointing his hand towards the approaching behemoth ship that was creating waves twice the size of Izuku himself as it slowly moved towards the harbor's docks. Izuku squeaked and opened his bag. He put on his CRB glasses and put his bag of Jolt tokens into his bag. He left the rest in his yellow bag and after zipping it up, pulled it back and over his shoulders. Ash twirled the shotgun she had and holstered it on her back left hip, and Cassidy lit a cigar. All right, we'll wait until it ports. Then we'll climb up from the back, Cassidy started, walking away and presumably to the driving part of the ship. Ash and Izuku waited with Bob, stashing the bag of things they stole into a compartment in the boat. The boat heaved with great difficulty to a stop, barely stopping in time. An anchor was thrown down along with several ropes, and Izuku and Ash watched some men tie the ropes to metal posts. However, they noticed another figure run across the dock and start swiftly taking people out. That's probably the Hanzo guy Cassidy wants to talk to, Ash muttered to herself, but voicing her thoughts for Izuku to hear, and he nodded in agreement. Cassidy started driving the boat towards the barge's rear and lowered the anchor a few meters out so the boats wouldn't collide with each other. Cassidy comes walking out of the door and heads to Bob. Izuku looks towards him and notices that Ash is already on his shoulder. Izuku gulped as he knew what was about to happen. Cassidy and Ash just smirked, Bob kindly helping Izuku onto his shoulder, the team clutching the metallic arm in fear. Bob bent down before super jumping up, the boat they were just standing on bobbing up and down with some water washing over the deck. Bob didn't jump high enough, but got most of the way. With his sheer strength, Bob clung to the side of the barge thanks to the angle before launching himself up to the ledge. He pulled himself up, allowing his human passengers to get off before setting foot and solid ground himself. The four were along an empty flat space, behind the high-raised block where the captain sat. They kept close to the wall so the captain couldn't look down and spot them. Bob specifically tried hard as he was significantly bigger than the rest of them. They were blocked off from the crux of the deck thanks to large shipping containers stacked like a pyramid. Bob helped the three up before getting himself up. The three then got on his shoulders so they could peer over shipping container. People were walking around, moving boxes and moving under deck. Cassidy nodded and ducked down so he couldn't be seen and motioned for the others to follow. Once they had, he grabbed Izuku's shoulders. Midoriya, you stay here with Bob. Me and Ash will go find Hanzo. Try and keep yourself out of trouble, Cassidy instructed the boy. Izuku nodded. He was reluctant and obviously upset he would be on the sideline, but he was only 14 and had no idea how to fight. All he had was his gadgets and wit, but one surprise would have his head on a plate. Okay, stay safe. Let's go, Ash, Cassidy said and silently hopped onto the top of the shipping container. Ash followed, and Izuku silently watched them carefully move off and disappear below deck. Izuku wasn't sure if he should wait here or go somewhere else, but he is taken by surprise when he sees an Omnic that was standing by on watch suddenly get taken out. He watched someone materialize right next to him, blue paper flying away from them. They turned and Izuku saw someone in a white Miko dress and a white fox mask with red stripes covering their face. Izuku watched closer as the arrival of this person worried Izuku. They clearly weren't on the Hashimoto side as they took down one of their members, but judging by their figure and her teal blonde hair, they were a female, therefore not Hanzo. Izuku watched her look around before pouncing down below deck, and Izuku felt his breath hitch. If they were a hero, Cassidy and Ash is in trouble, especially as her quirk is allowing her to teleport. Both Cassidy and Ash are good at hand-to-hand, but if they are taken by surprise, or if the woman has a weapon, they're screwed. What should he do? So, this was the end of part 3 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.